Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Frank Kosarek. I am the co-founder at BizPort and the D2C consumer vertical lead for our M&A practice. And this is...
Hey guys, I'm Kyle Morioka, co-founder at BizPort, leading all professional services M&A.
And today we've got a special one for you. This is called the M&A Peel Back. And so today we're going to cover a really interesting transaction on the table. It turns out a $3 billion American company is buying Europe's biggest pet supplies brand, and they told Wall Street it was a bargain. So let's peel it back. Let's see who's at the table first. Kyle, to kick off, who are we dealing with here? Who is Central Garden & Pet?
Yeah, so Central Garden Pet, they're a $3.2 billion US-based company, public. They're a serial acquirer, so they've done over 13 deals as a most recent. They have this whole central to home strategy, and then they have this cost and simplicity program. All in all, they're selling a bunch of pet consumables and services and other products related to dogs and cats mainly. And then on the other side, TRIXIE, it's a Germany-based company. They're focusing on non-food pet supplies, the biggest European player, doing more than $300 million in euros, not USD. So they're pretty large, and I think worth noting, they've also built a lot of their own product development in-house. I think they've done over 500 plus different products every year, and work with major pet retailers to distribute their products.
Right. So we've got a huge American pet conglomerate. By the way, Central Garden & Pet is like the best in the business. They've acquired over 60 companies since their founding in the 80s. This is like their M&A bread and butter. This is what they do. And they're acquiring a huge manufacturer of hard goods based in Europe. So this is this is a headline deal. It's really interesting. So what are we going to talk about today? Let's talk about a couple of things. I think the first thing is, why does this deal even exist? Is the price even as good as they say? Is it fair? And what should a founder who's watching this take away from this deal, right? And we all know pet care is like a very hot category right now. I'm sure a lot of you watching this are interested in, hey, how does this deal spell the future for my own business?
Yeah.
So we talked a bit about who the buyer and the seller are. And so it's interesting. One of the important pieces here is it's a large deal, but it is not a complete acquisition, right, Kyle? We're talking about an 80% stake for about $400 million, give or take 340 to 400 million. And looking at public record here, it's to your point, TRIXIE's doing about over 300 million euros of revenue, about 62 million euros of EBITDA. And there's some pretty aggressive back of the napkin math here. So I guess now that we know who's at the table, let's think about what's the strategy here? Why would Central Garden & Pet be interested in acquiring someone like TRIXIE?
Yeah, I think I have one important angle where Central and Garden Pet. I don't know if you read this, Frank, but last year they had a UK operation.
Mm-hmm.
They had pulled out. So they basically said, hey, we're going to stop trying to grow in that market organically. And then year to date, over 90% of their sales are actually US based. Very heavily in North America, not Europe.
That's right.
So I think a big synergy there is that this is kind of their way of buying into the European market.
Good point.
Just taking it over on day one.
Yeah. Central bought more than a German company. They bought a European passport, kind of, didn't they? Right?
Yeah, European passport.
That's interesting. So, and it seems like there is a distribution network that Central is going to tap. By the way, other brands that Central already owns. Think about these. You might know Cadet dog treats. You might know Comfort Zone behavior products. You might know Nylabone. To your point, Kyle, these are probably U.S. primarily, distributed primarily in the US, and with a distribution network, a fulfillment network, logistics, et cetera, in Europe. Who's to say, can Central then plug directly into that and distribute all those brands into Europe? That seems pretty compelling. And also, it's interesting. I read this yesterday, looked at there's a press release that Central put out about this transaction. And the CEO, Nico, was talking about how this acquisition will make the largest pet supplies company globally. And that's super interesting, right? I did not realize that this is going to create the behemoth of behemoths as it relates to pet wellness and pet products. Yeah. So that's super interesting. And so it's also, noted in that press release, it seems like TRIXIE doesn't do much as it relates to e-commerce. It seems like they're a wholesale B2B business. So what else, if I'm Central, why am I acquiring that? Isn't online super important?
Yeah. I think Central sees that as an opportunity for them to basically develop their e-commerce arm. So a lot of the products they're actually selling online. Granted, it's probably mostly retail, but still a very high online presence.
Gotcha.
I think that was definitely baked into the the synergies that they had at least for post-sale stuff.
Agreed. And it also seems like TRIXIE's well oiled as it relates to the cat subcategory. Cats are like having a moment now. Everybody's talking about cats. Not that cats are new, but they're, everybody's got a dog these days, and it seems like cats are kind of making their entrance. So that's another feather in the cap of TRIXIE. So it seems like you're saying, okay, some of the strategic points here are A, hey, this is a ticket to Europe. B, maybe TRIXIE is underdeveloped in e-com, but that's a immediate lever, right, for Central to kind of like expand upon. And then also they've got, a serious cat division that Central gets to absorb right off the bat, right? I like that. Okay, that makes sense. And another interesting piece, and this is getting on to valuation, but this business, TRIXIE, founder-led, 50 years old, give or take. The founder is exiting. And starting a foundation. I read that in the press release. And that's like, isn't that all of our dreams here, right? Everyone wants to be able to make their own foundation. The Frank J. Kosarek Foundation is a couple years away, but we'll get there.
Yeah. And the founder also ran the business for 5 decades.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's right.
Older than us. We weren't on this planet Earth for years. So,
well, that means the dude better get paid, right? If he's walking away from a business he's run for 5 decades. So let's talk about that now. $1 million question, valuation, right? Valuation is what everyone wants to hear. And, a business is worth what someone will pay for it. But in this case, we mentioned before, TRIXIE's doing what? 62 million euros of EBITDA. And there's not a specific multiple, reported in the press release, but we're thinking probably 8 times that number is the enterprise value, considered here. So that puts us in the 400-500 million euro range. Is that cheap? Is it expensive? What do we think?
Yeah, that should be seen kind of as a good buy for Central.
Yes.
So compared to these numbers, right, it's around call it around 8x. We've seen the top line valuation was around 500 million euros. They're going to get a discount.
Yes.
Compared to what they would actually get in the public market.
And that's the reason why the CEO of Central Garden said, hey, a lot of the risk has been taken out of this deal because of the valuation, right? He's got, let's call it turns of EBITDA to mess up, essentially. Even if he does mess up the valuation, which he probably didn't, he's got some breathing room in there. And this seems like a pretty good deal for him. But here's another piece that maybe, would raise some eyebrows. It looks like TRIXIE's top line revenue has been declining ever so slightly. This is an up and to the right type of business. I think this is a stagnant, maybe down to the right a little business. So does that make the valuation fair? Is there a different perspective that a buyer should take here?
Yeah. I think overall, when you and I are speaking with buyers, they obviously value inherent growth rate. The buyer's always asking themselves, okay, if the business is growing right now, then I have more confidence as a buyer to continue growing the business.
Yeah.
But I think when things are even flat, or obviously when they're decreasing, it's okay, there's definitely some risk here. If it's a macro thing, or is it like a operational thing? Who knows? So I think there's definitely some discount baked into that deal.
Agreed. And we like to say, Kyle, at BizPort, by the way, we advise a lot of sell-side M&A processes in the pet space. We like to say businesses are bought, not sold, right? So I think in this case, Central is buying this business. Deutsche Bank is selling it, yes, but Central is interested, right? And so yes, the declining sales might be a flag for some buyers, but the strategic angle of saying, hey, we get distribution, we get a toehold into the European market, maybe it doesn't matter, right? This is a strategic buyer after all, so maybe it does. Interesting. So we think valuation's pretty fair here.
Yeah.
And
sorry, what do you think, I guess in the transcript yesterday for yesterday's announcement, why did they share the multiple related to the pre-synergy number versus the post-synergy number? Why do you think that is?
Yeah, my guess is it has to do with forward guidance on the investor side to say, hey, look, we are unloading a boatload of money here to acquire this, but we've got already modeled out synergies. This is not like a theoretical synergy piece that justifies this upfront investment. And the CEO says multiple times on the press conference, hey, even without all the margin questions and the sales decline, this is an accretive transaction, meaning EPS is going up by doing this transaction. So, I think it's just kind of doubling down on the accretive categorization here and telling investors that. That's my guess. I don't know.
Yeah, makes sense.
And it's interesting. And I think it's interesting, in this case, the CEO is kind of using the price they pay as not only like, hey, we got a great deal, but it's also like protection against downside, right? It's kind of like, hey, we've got an additional turns of EBITDA on the bone, so to speak, from our price to earnings ratio. That helps compensate us for some of the risk of, declining sales. And the other piece to bring up, Kyle, is super interesting. I hear this all the time. TRIXIE makes, toys, right? We're talking toys, we're talking training and sport, like rings for your dog to jump through, little like carriages, grooming products, right? So these are hard goods. This is not like, hey, I go buy a brush and now every month for the rest of my life, I'm buying a brush. Probably not. I probably buy it once and I probably don't buy it again. So I think that's also a risk here where the hard goods component of this deal is like, investors might raise their eyebrows, say, hey, like, are you buying a revenue stream here? And the answer is partially to some extent. They have a great branded, white label TRIXIE product set. But also it's a lot about the
Yeah, totally agree. Bars are willing to pay more for subscription-based revenue, as we've seen before, versus like these one-time, two-time purchases.
Totally. We hear about what are they called? Consumables or depletables, right? Where I buy a little cartridge or let's say a dispenser, and then I got to go refill that dispenser, right? Not only is it like more economical to acquire that customer, maybe for a higher price up front, but then that's a recurring revenue stream. You own that customer forever, and that's really valuable to an acquirer. I don't think we're getting as much of that here, but that doesn't seem to matter to Central that much. And then also, you and I have been party to a bunch of transactions here where putting the deal out there, by the way, and this one has been diligenced already. I think this announcement was actually just the signing, saying, hey, we're done with diligence, we're signing, we're going to close in, they say 2027, first half. There's also the challenge of integration, right? Getting this business plugged into the mothership. So how do you see the kind of risks there?
Yeah, actually, even before them closing, since they are a public company, I would expect, a lot of regulation. And I think what makes it a little bit more complex too, it's like a cross-border deal, right? US-based company buying a European company.
Yes.
So I wonder, like, do you think they're going to run into any like anti-compete, regulation, or what does that look like?
Yeah, it's a good point. And also, I remember on the press release too, the CEO was talking about how, hey, this is kind of a difficult diligence process, right? They keep books differently in Germany than we do, right? The tax treatment is different, right? We have a lot of work to do cross border to get this thing closed. And then also, we've got a really interesting dynamic here where the founding team is mostly staying on to continue running this brand, and that's super. This happens a lot, Kyle, right? Like that's not unexpected.
Yeah. Key employees typically stay on for at least 1 to 2 years. Kind of depends on each deal, but usually that time frame.
Yeah, and we see this also not only from strategics, but sometimes there'll be an offer of employment for the founding team to stay on with the mothership. There might be an earnout that the founding team has to achieve. There might be the equivalent of like a seller note or some sort of like holdback on the transaction that de-risks it for the acquirer. And it kind of makes sense if you're spending $400 million for a foreign business that you've never run before. You probably don't want to strip the management team out of there and like go without training wheels, so to speak.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's super interesting. And I think when I come across a deal like this, like I like to tell the founders, look, even if it's private equity, even if it's a strategic, they're probably going to ask you to keep running the business in some capacity, right? For some period of time until they know how to make this thing run. So expect that, if you're looking for lessons from this. So the other piece is, I guess let's do like a little scorecard here. I would say, buyer, seller, huge deal. This is the largest pet supplies company in the world if the deal is consummated. I think that alone is a headline. What do we think of strategy? Give it a score A through F.
A through F.
Yeah.
I would say it's a solid A. I think Central kind of realized, again, like going back to the UK example.
Yeah.
They kind of realized that it was probably harder than they thought to organically expand in the UK. But then they have this inherent skill to, acquire all these growing brands and kind of run them more or less like independently with a lot of founders still leading the charge. So I think it's a great way to enter the European market with a splash and basically just take over the market on day one.
Yeah. Take it over by storm. I like it. I'm going to go on valuation. I'm also going to give valuation an A. And the reason is it's an equity sale, partial equity sale. This isn't a full buyout. We've got, basically an equity roll post-close with the management team, and the management team is staying on. That's a risk mitigant. And then also, we've got some meat on the bone as it relates to valuation, right? You
Yeah.
said Central Garden is valued at, a much higher multiple than they're paying for this deal. So I'm gonna give that one an A too.
Yeah.
And then, and then curious on integration, success. What would this actually look like on the street? How difficult is that? Give that a score of A through F as well.
Yeah, I guess we'll see, but I imagine it's not a walk in the park. It's a whole different market. Even the different time zone makes it more complex. Regulations, I'm sure, are vastly different in Europe for consumer goods. But I do think that TRIXIE has a very good footprint for logistics, manufacturing in Europe. Maybe there's an opportunity for Central Garden Pet to kind of consolidate their operations to Europe and then start shipping goods from Europe to US.
Yeah.
Maybe that simplifies their supply chain.
Yeah. I'm going to give it a wait and see too, because let's see how long this actually takes. They're giving some pretty, conservative guidance of first half of 2027 to close. Maybe they can get it done faster than that, but it's not going to be easy. Cross-border stuff is never fun.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. And I think the other question I'll ask for you is, if you're the founder, if you're this guy, what's his name? I can't remember his name right now. Bonnick Hansen. He founded this company, 5 decades ago. What's going through your mind?
Yeah. I mean, for him, I would be stoked.
Yeah.
Right in the business, pretty much for his entire professional life, I would assume.
Yeah.
I don't know his age, but I think from a realistic lens too, like he's kind of passing on his legacy.
Yeah.
To a large company that just knows the space very intimately and obviously
Right.
cares a lot about the dog and cat space.
Yeah.
So I would probably feel pretty confident in kind of continuing the TRIXIE legacy.
Yeah.
Being in good hands.
Yeah, super agree. And if there's anyone who can take care of the brand and close this transaction well, it's got to be Central Garden. I mean, they are old pros at this. They've been doing this since 1980. If there's anyone I want to sell to, it's Central Garden and Pet. The other thing I'll add before we drop is, I am sure this is an overnight success that has been many years in the making, right? I would be shocked if this founder, invented the idea to exit this brand, anything less than 2-3 years ago. I'm sure he has been carefully planning his finances, his team, his all of his personal tax treatment to make this happen, and also make this asset something that a big strategic would buy. So none of this is by accident. On both sides, this has been happening for many, many years. And if you are, let's say you're operating a pet brand, you're thinking about selling, right, at some point in the future, the time's sort of now to start thinking about that. Right, I'm like, if model after this guy, right? Think about, okay, if that's my goal, what do I do today to ladder up to that 3-year goal?
Yeah, totally agree.
So, anyway, well, this has been a fun M&A peel back. We peeled back the banana, got in there, tossed around a couple ideas. We wish buyer and seller best of luck here. We respect both, and we will be back for the next peel back.
Sweet.